William died as soon as he was removed from the roots and vines clinging to his petrified corpse. That's what they said to me as they carried his body away down the old tar road that slithered between the freshly trimmed bushes and thick trees. I would have thought it was some kind of cruel joke if I had not seen proof of his presence just before his death. Even if I didn't see his sun-dried skin and bones reach out desperately towards me, I have seen enough here to know that this place just beyond the mountains is wholly cursed with something malevolent, alien, and dangerous. My job mainly revolves around clearing weeds, planting trees, mowing lawns, and removing woody debris, ranging from the single road that leads to the observatory here past the mountains, to the grounds of the various radio and coordinate towers that are dotted across the escarpment. I work underneath the towering array of radio telescopes that are forever pointed upwards towards the distant stars. I made the mistake of calling them satellites before meeting my then acquaintance, now friend Paul. They're actually radio telescopes and not satellites, he said, rather nasally, though he has since lost that nerd-like superiority in his tone ever since he started working out, among other things. I remember taking a step back from weeding the perimeter of that small facility they worked in, since he approached me first. He was one of the only scientists there to talk to someone like me. "Guess you learn something new every day," I replied. "Well, it's that distinction that separates a good-paying job to..." He stopped before he finished. "Anyways, I have something to ask of you." I looked up at him from the ground I was working on, before standing up and looking down at him. "I'm swamped with work right now. They've given me much more than one person is able to manage. So I wanted to offer you a deal. You do some of the work I allocate for you, on top of what you're already doing, in exchange for whatever you want from the shops." He paused before adding, "Free of charge. Black Label and Marlboro Reds." "Deal," he stated, with a firm handshake between us. Our pact sealed on the freshly weeded clearing amongst the trees and mountains. From then on, any additional work I did rewarded me, and I quickly grew a liking to the additional reports and maintenance requests I was tasked with doing. I, alongside a few others, lived at that old facility in the mountains. They used to pay for company vehicles and fuel, before people exploited those benefits to the detriment of us all. They found it was cheaper to provide the bare essentials on site, as opposed to having us drive in and out every day. I was bunking with another groundskeeper, William Darce, for most of my stay here. Will and I kept a professional distance from one another, though we would occasionally join each other and banter over a smoke on our breaks. He was shorter than I was, though that's common when you're a bit over 2 meters tall. We were roughly the same age, mid-30s, differing in style as he adopted an outback aesthetic, despite being a short drive away from the coast. I do miss him, to the extent that I have one less person to complain to while on break. We were doing our usual business for the day, mowing the lawns, weeding, and that sort, when we were tasked to cull the invasive bush that was quickly spreading across the escarpment. Lantana grows fast, and the thicket it makes combined with other weeds has serious consequences for the native biodiversity, according to Paul. We were cutting branches and poisoning stems when from the corner of my eye, I saw Will fall before he made a throat-shredding shriek. "My fucking leg!" I quickly got up and ran over to him. A thick, woody vine was wrapped around his ankle as numerous thorns pierced his pants and flesh. Thin patches of blood coated his leg as even I struggled to remove the weeds grasping at his leg, refusing to let go. I tried to cut at the vines holding him with a saw, but they clung stubbornly to him. He gagged in pain as his erratic breathing strained his voice. "Quick! Nathan, hand me the poison!" I quickly gave it to him, not even thinking how or why he would ask for such a thing in a time like this. It didn't take long to find out why, though. The vines went limp as he poured the dark blue solution onto the cuts I made in the weeds. The thorny grasp quickly loosened as Will pulled his leg free, the blood dripping onto the grass, only to be quickly absorbed by the dry red earth. "Thanks, mate, I wouldn't have gotten free without you." He told me later what had happened, He was trimming back the thicket when a vine lashed out and whipped his leg, the serrated thorns digging into him as the weeds possessed a spark of otherworldly intelligence. "You're being dramatic," I huffed as we shared a cigarette. He took a long drag from it, almost taking the butt in with his puff. "You saw it too, whatever that is." He gestured to the dark, dense thicket past the clearing. "It isn't natural. No matter how much you hacked at it, she wouldn't let go." A long silence followed as he gave me the last puff. I ground the red-hot butt into the dirt with my boot as Will put a hand on my shoulder. "I appreciate it," he said softly, before limping to the looming array and shadowed observatory in the distance. I was still thinking of what had transpired as I was carrying out Paul's tasks for the day. He wanted me to check on the various towers dotted around the landscape, plus record anything abnormal that I might find. Each tower has a small shack housing all the machinery and wires underneath the soaring spires of rusted metal. The technology they relied upon was old, far older than me. Most of what I saw was either analog, buttons, dials, or heavy levers and switches. The buttons had a satisfying click, and the various switches had a pleasing weight to them that New Age technology lacks. They should most definitely update their equipment, though I will never recommend that verbally. I was just turning one of the radio towers back on when I heard rustling from the bushes. At the time I thought it was just feral deer. They're pretty common out in these parts, and there have been many attempts at reducing their numbers around the facility. To no avail, of course. I was fully content at ignoring it until I heard strange noises from the trees. Now I'm not a security guard, but I do need to either alert someone that people were trespassing or attempt to remove them myself. I left my tools and things behind as I kept as quiet and low to the ground as I could. I followed this freshly made path up through the woods for what must have been half an hour, only to stumble upon a small clearing I haven't seen before. There were areas we were designated to, and clearly I had made my way into Will's allocated space. But since he wasn't around, I figured it was up to me to at least check if what I was following was an animal or something else. I wandered up further before seeing bright colors from over a small, grassy mound. My hunting instincts kicked in as my breathing slowed as I slumped down, crawling closer to get a better look at my prey, only to be greeted by the sight of 3 small makeshift tents, empty beer cans, and drunk teenagers trespassing in a restricted area. I breathed a sigh of relief. I was expecting a wild hunter or something worse, I suppose. I stood up at the border of the woods facing them. I looked around my feet for a branch, finding the perfect one, hollow and rotten inside. I stood on it, making a loud, dry crack as the magpies above me flew away. I stood up straight, watching them with a grin on my face, as even from a distance I could see their eyes widened. I held a particularly large branch in my hand, making sure to drag it loudly across the ground as I started walking towards them. They started backing away before sprinting to their tents, pulling them from the ground as they started running in the opposite direction. I chortled to myself as I watched a few of them trip over each other as they ran off. My smile quickly faded as I saw the beer cans on the ground, though, since it wasn't technically my area to clean, I didn't have anything to worry about. Still, I picked up the few empty beers I could and brought them, and the tools I left back by the shack, back with me to the facility. It was a decent walk, but one I enjoyed nonetheless. While I could request a quad bike to get around faster, I'm personally not a fan of them, and I need to do some exercise while I'm essentially living out here. I was greeted by the familiar dingy facility, along with various educated folk who hurried busily with their work late into the evening. I climbed a flight of stairs as I approached our unit, with trash and filth blocking the living room door. Half-empty scotch and an opened pack of cigarettes sat on the table, with Will sitting on the stained sofa, his leg bandaged and a lit cig in his mouth. "How's the leg, Will?" "Been digging thorns out since I got back," he replied, before flicking the flaming remains onto the counter. An emptiness emanated from him as he stared blankly at the wall, barely paying me any attention. "You all right, mate?" I asked quietly, taking a seat next to him as I felt the lukewarm scotch burn down my throat. "Yeah, nah," he answered coldly. He seemed to sink into the sofa in this resigned state of being. I wasn't one to pry, though I had been around for a couple years to see his bouts of seasonal depression, and for the few who have been around for as long as he has, said that he is very cuggy, as they put it. Still, to see him in a state such as this seemed wholly unnatural and caused discomfort to float listlessly in the air alongside the strong smoke. "Well, I scared some kids away from one of your clearings near Tower 3. Should have seen the looks on their faces. Anyways, they left some beer cans behind. I cleaned some up and—" "Nathan," he interrupted suddenly. "Yeah, mate, what's up?" I asked, only to notice his chilling gaze focus on me from the corner of my eye. I almost jumped when I noticed and faced him. "There are no clearings around that area." His voice was but a murmur. I shrugged it off as best I could. "It's a small one, you've probably missed it," or he slammed his fist onto the table in front of us, causing the bottle to shake and spill onto the near-empty pack of cigarettes. "Nathan, I told you there are no clearings around Tower 3. It's just bush and trees." His voice was raised, and for the first time around him, I was actually startled and somewhat intimidated. "For fuck's sake, Will," I blurted, as I quickly leaned forward and picked up the almost empty bottle and sodden smokes from the small table. "What's gotten into you?" He sat there silently, slinking back into his imprint in the sofa as he stared blankly into the wall. "I'll show you where I was tomorrow. Should probably make sure those kids didn't come back." "Yeah," was all he said for the rest of the evening, as we climbed into our trembling metal bunk bed, with the faint red lights from one of the radio telescopes blinking dimly in the night, the stars above just barely visible as dark clouds swirled and loomed above. I woke up early the next day, and to my bitterness, Will was nowhere to be found. From what I can tell, he had gotten ready hastily and started his errands earlier than usual. I boiled some black coffee that I drank near the window as part of my daily ritual before heading down to the showers and shared kitchen. There I ran into Paul in his usual spot at one of the small tables near the fridge. "Paul," I said with the same reverence as you would for an old friend. "Nat," he replied, smiling at my disdain for that nickname. "Can I be serious with you for a moment?" I said softly as his ears perked up. He lowered his milky coffee down before locking his hands together. "Shoot. I know you don't talk to him much, but did you catch Will yesterday?" I asked delicately, to which he leaned in close and muttered to me. Well, I didn't hear much, but everyone was checking in on him when he got back. He barely spoke to any of us, probably because he thinks we'll mock him for his stories of the woods again. He snapped at me last night, spilled most of the whiskey you got for me and ruined the few smokes I had left. I figured he was just moody and irritable, but he hasn't acted like this before. My voice lowered to the same cadence of a church mouse as a few eyes lingered on us a little too long for my liking. "What did you say that set him off?" he asked. I cleared my throat before I responded. "I mentioned scaring some teenagers in this clearing near Tower 3. I saw the intrigue in his face drain, giving way to an expression I couldn't place. It was a mix of realization, awe, and fear. "There are no clearings near Tower 3. I've surveyed that area countless times. We've excavated around Tower 1 for that meteorite that fell last summer. Had to clear some trees out that way. You sure you weren't near there instead?" "I'm sure. I've had the layout of this place memorized for a while now," I said confidently. "You've barely been here for 3 years, he chortled. We exchanged a few more words before he gave me some extra tasks for today, mainly more maintenance and filling a report for one of the dishes on site. I waved goodbye before grabbing some bread and cheese for the road. As I set out, I made sure to keep an eye out for Will while on my ride-on lawnmower. The escarpment surrounds the facility, like the steep rock walls of a crater. There is only one road that goes in and out, but there are various trails that are followed by rangers and folk such as myself. There is a stream that flows down during especially wet years, and a small body of water that is rumored to house fireflies, though I haven't seen evidence of their existence until recently. There were numerous animals that made their way into and past the escarpment, such as kangaroos, deer, echidnas, and such. Signs of their presence could be both seen and felt across the site, as broken twigs and scratched bark could be observed, along with the strange sounds that emanated from deep within the trees during the moonless nights. I put aside some of my other tasks, such as weeding and general land care, to search for Will, as a strange feeling seemed to linger from the night before. I spent a good chunk of the morning searching for him, to no avail. While looking for him, I ended up finishing the report for one of the many radio telescopes. The tall white mountain of metal casting long shadows across the thicket and trees. A set of metal stairs led up to a rusted metal platform before leading into the tower itself. The base of the telescope was round and analogous to the base of a lighthouse, with a spiral staircase leading up to an old control room with a number of disheveled scientists working tirelessly, surrounded by dusty analog technology that emitted constant mechanical whirs. Though I knew some of them by name, I was in too much of a hurry to strike up the usual conversation, aside from asking if they happened to have spotted Will as I filled out my report. "I was outside not long ago to get some fresh air, but I haven't seen him, I'm afraid," Julie said, a fairly young and inspiring scientist with silky dark hair and bright brown eyes. "I appreciate it," I replied. My tone seemed to make her shift in her seat in front of a large, old console. "Although," she interjected, "I did see something. There was some shifting in the trees, and I heard what I think was the loud hum of some machinery. Perhaps that was your friend." "Where was this?" "Near the tower closest to here, near Tower 3, I think," she answered. I finished my report and thanked her before leaving. I walked along the old platform outside that circled the dish, the tower I worked on from the other day standing tall adjacent to the age-old trees. A thought crossed my mind that I hadn't considered until this point. Did he go to check the clearing? He seemed so confident that it didn't exist, and maybe he went to either prove himself right or be humbled by a discovery that he ought to be common knowledge for a man such as himself. I felt inclined to prove my hunch correct as I walked on the familiar gravel path, past the tower and into the same woods that I walked through the day before. While I was traversing through the particularly dense bushes and grass, I heard a deep thrum that must have been what Julie had heard before. It was all-encompassing, surrounding me as I climbed the soft ground. As I looked for Will, I realized that the clearing was taking far longer to reach than before. I checked my watch occasionally and saw my trek has taken an extra half an hour for no apparent reason at all. By the time I reached where the clearing was, the sun was already starting to slink behind the mountains. However, saying the clearing had changed since my last visit was an understatement. While there was no trees in the area, a thicket I hadn't seen before seemed to sprout and surround the area overnight. It suffocated the small hills and quickly stifled my progress. The thrum was louder now, and if I squinted my eyes enough, I could see the branches shuddering. "Will, you out here, mate?" I bellowed, as dark birds scattered from the trees above me. Despite not even knowing if he was out here, I felt that I was closer to him now that I was at the border of the thicket. The surrounding trees casted long, dark shadows that creeped over us. I essentially prowled the perimeter as I looked for a way deeper into the thicket, as I saw the thicket grow even thicker. The invasive woody bushes intertwined with the sharp, non-native vines in such a way that comparing them to bones and muscle wouldn't be a leap of the imagination. Eventually, after more searching, I found what looked like a deer trail that led further into the sharp bushes and undergrowth. I was considering turning back or radioing for assistance when a low, almost raspy groan that sounded all too familiar pierced the now eerie silence. "Will? Is that you, Will?" I shouted, as I suddenly found myself crawling into the trail. It got real dark after a few meters, so I pulled out the shitty flashlight I used inside the towers to guide the way inside, the dim light causing the cascading shadows of branches to fold into themselves as I crawled through. The woody thorns tugging and pulling at my clothes as the skin of my hands was gradually peeled away, bit by bit. I felt like I crawled for an eternity until finally arriving to something firm and solid. A strange feeling trickled down my spine as I felt around the structure. At this point, a painful, debilitating throbbing persisted in my head as my mind became a maelstrom of thoughts. This thicket, it wasn't here before. Along with that, did I only hope it was Will that I heard from within this thick growth? Was I even in the right place? Unfortunately, every conflicting thought I had was all proved correct, as I felt the very clear outline of a door from the structure. I managed to push enough of the stubborn vines and woody debris away from the door. Opening it gently, I was exposed to an eerie and horrific sight. The door led into a building that was all too similar to our apartment. It looked like an exact copy, down to the various stains in particular corners of the small building. I felt a strange case of déjà vu that haunted me as I moved carefully over the onslaught of plant growth that dominated every surface of that strange building. I was so focused on trying not to trip over the robust roots on the floor that I almost ran into the corpse of William Darce in front of me, skin sunken and petrified, analogous to sun-soaked leather as it peeled in strange ways that haunts me to this very day. I stood there in shock as I looked at the haunting visage of my friend, sitting in the exact position I last saw him in, the long, empty bottle of Black Label still atop of the desiccated cigarettes. I felt dizzy and I stumbled as I could feel consciousness slipping away with every fleeting moment. Though a spine-chilling adrenaline kept me on my feet as the threat of danger made itself manifest before me. As I was stumbling and flummoxed, the body of my friend before me slumped. Then, with an almost ethereal presence, it rose to meet me. "Nathan," the corpse of my friend said raspy, dryly. Every syllable sounded like it took a lifetime to pronounce. The voice seemed to originate not from the dried mouth of my friend, but from the root-covered floor. "So long, so very long, an endless, dreamless sleep. Why did you leave me?" I was filled with fear and horror of the thing before me. Below me, I could feel the floor shifting as the room seemed to glow with an unearthly hue. I could hear the distinct sound of dry bones rubbing together as the undying carcass of William Darce shambled closer to me. I ran and didn't look back. I crawled frantically out the way I came, getting scratched and clawed as the vines attempted to grip on me. The thicket shifted violently in the windless night as the opening I crawled through seemed to shrink as I approached. I crawled faster and faster, just as I was met with the untainted grass and brisk night air. The entrance closed on my foot. I groaned in pain as I felt thick thorns sink into my pants and shoe as I did everything I could to get out. I felt my shoe starting to slip, which gave me a faint, fleeting sense of hope as I pulled harder. Those thick thorns tore skin and wet flesh from my leg and foot as I screamed, my shoe finally slipping off. I turned back to see my boot and my strips of flesh dangling from the interwoven weeds, the trickling blood being lapped and licked by the vines before shifting, my boot and lost flesh quickly being consumed by the thicket. I shambled back to the facility in a state of shock, hobbling on my good foot as my blood dripped onto the red earth. I was on the brink of collapse the entire way, but adrenaline and fear kept me going. I eventually made it back and collapsed on a chair near the main entrance as staff gave me worried glances, their faces distorted as my vision blurred. I was in and out of consciousness. When I came to, I briefly saw someone patching my leg and foot, with a handful of people carrying me away to somewhere. I came to wrapped in a towel, with a damp cloth sitting on my temple as Paul and a few worried faces looked down at me. I tried to get up, only for Paul to put a hand on my shoulder, my legs dangling off the firm couch I was laid upon. "Easy, mate, lay down for a bit. Now, can you tell us what happened?" I shifted uncomfortably. My blood felt cold as I tried to reply. "I found him. I saw Will." The expressions widened as they looked down at me. "Where is he?" A voice I didn't recognize asked. I wasn't sure how to respond. Do I tell them what I saw? It felt real. It was real, wasn't it? "He's trapped," I uttered weakly. "Trapped?" they whispered amongst themselves. He's trapped in a thicket. It's near Tower 3, a ways past the trees. Well, let's go get him now, Paul said, turning away and started quickly walking away before I called out, Wait! What is it, Nat? He stopped in his tracks and looked at me with a confused look. What do I say? I have to keep them from going there, at least during the night. It's not safe out there. I tried getting him myself, and look what happened. It's best to wait until dawn. He'll be safe until then. I lied. They looked amongst themselves, muttering quietly before their focus drifted towards my leg and myself. All right, Paul said. We'll wait until sunrise, but you must stay here. I know he's your friend, but you're in no condition to help us get him out of there. As sad as it is to admit this, I was relieved when he said that. I had Paul aid me to my room, as the hairs of my neck stood on end. Though it was exactly how I left it, I couldn't get the image of that root and vine-covered mockery out of my head. I laid in bed for hours, tossing and turning as I had the most vivid and terrifying nightmares, where I saw my friend and myself trapped in the roots and vines deep beneath the surface, hidden under layers of soil in an eternal slumber, rotting, decaying, but undying, suffering perpetual agony as the pain he felt was transmitted to myself. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, toss about tirelessly as the thin slivers of dawn peered through the half-closed blinds. It must have been around midday when Paul knocked on the door of my apartment. He let himself in, carrying something in an opaque plastic bag as his pale face met mine. He didn't need to say anything, for we shared the same burden. You saw him, didn't you? I uttered. Yeah, I did, he replied emptily. Is everyone okay? As okay as you can be. Silence followed before he spoke again. We found him in the field. After clearing away enough of the lantana and Madeira to let us through, he was just laying on the ground, and it looked like he'd been there for months. I know, I said quietly. Did you see anything else? A building or... He shook his head as he grabbed one of the old metal chairs near the bunk and sat down beside me. We had an ambulance with us. Originally we called them for you, but with how long it took them to get here, they helped us search and find him. He was still alive, but when we removed the vines and roots wrapped around him, Paul hung his head low. Though my friend had now passed, a strange and brief relief washed over me. He fiddled with his hands before pulling something out of the bag he was carrying. We found this near him. They didn't know what to make of it. The thing was covered in dirt. He pulled the object out of the bag. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. It looked like a leg made of wood, leaves, and roots. As I looked closer, though, I saw my weathered boot in his hands, fabric peeling and yellowed with age, as if it had been exposed to the elements for decades. I shuddered at the implication.